There's a reason you can't focus, and the Greek philosophers discovered it 2,400 years ago. No, it's not your phone's fault. Have you ever sat down to study, opened a book, read the same sentence 3 times in a row, and understood nothing? It feels like your brain is there, but you aren't. And while everyone tells you to turn off notifications, eliminate distractions, and do the Pomodoro technique, you stay stuck in the same place. I know how difficult this is. Maybe you want to study to fulfill a dream, get into college, start a business, or help your family, but it feels like your own brain sabotages you. You study but don't really understand what you're studying, and when you feel like you finally get it, the knowledge seems shallow and fragile, which only makes you feel more insecure. Know that you are not the only one suffering from this. There is something that Plato and Aristotle understood about the human mind that explains exactly why you're struggling. It's a concept they call Damascene, or philosophical wonder. When you understand how it works, studying stops being torture and becomes inevitable. But there's a problem. What you call focus isn't real focus, it's just damage control. Often, you're not trying to learn, you're just trying to survive the boredom. And the worst part is that everything they taught you about how to study better might be making your situation worse. Let me tell you the story of Henry. He was a 17-year-old from Ohio, living in a working-class family. His dad was a factory worker and his mom was a nurse. Henry was the first in his family with a real chance to go to a good university, so he knew what was at stake. This one exam could change the trajectory of his entire family. But every time he opened his chemistry book, he felt his stomach clench. It wasn't laziness, it was something worse. It felt like each page was a mountain he had to climb with his bare hands. He'd read, reread, and pretend he understood. But deep down, he knew nothing stuck. He knew that tomorrow, he would have to do it all over again. To make matters worse, his friends seemed to get good grades easily. They picked things up so quickly. One of them even laughed in his face, saying the material was basic. This drove Henry to go home and study 5 or 6 hours a day. He made colorful summaries, used flashcards, watched countless YouTube videos, but his grades didn't improve. He started to hate studying with a physical intensity. Henry's problem wasn't a lack of effort. It was that he was doing everything for the wrong reasons, and his brain knew it. He wasn't studying to understand chemistry. He was studying to escape the pain of disappointing his parents and being the dumb friend. He just wanted chemistry to stop being a problem in his life. He did what everyone else does. He memorized sentences until they stuck in his short-term memory, and solved exercises using patterns instead of true comprehension. He was essentially tricking his brain with a feeling of familiarity that disguised itself as understanding. But familiarity is not understanding. It is merely recognition, and recognition doesn't survive a slightly different problem. Henry was trapped in a cycle that seemed productive, but was just aimless movement. Studying had become torture because he was trying to avoid the one thing that truly leads to learning: confusion. Whenever Henry encountered something he didn't understand, he fled as fast as possible towards the feeling of clarity. If there was a difficult question, he skipped it. If a concept didn't make sense, he copied the teacher's explanation or watched a video until someone simplified it enough to bypass his critical thinking. He didn't realize it, but he was training his brain to avoid intellectual discomfort at all costs. And here's the part nobody tells you. Confusion is the sound of learning happening. It's not a bug, it's a core functionality. You have been conditioned your whole life to treat confusion as the enemy. School taught you that not knowing is shameful, that the right answer matters more than the process. So you developed a reflex to eliminate confusion as quickly as possible. But think about it. Every great intellectual leap in your life began with you being stuck and confused. Instead of running away from that state, you need to stay in it long enough for your brain to rearrange the pieces. Henry was studying 6 hours a day, but spending 0 minutes actually thinking. He was consuming content, not processing knowledge. Then one day, frustrated by another C grade, he was in the school library and picked up a faded green book titled The Dialogues of Plato. He opened it to a random page where a character asks Socrates about knowledge. Socrates replies, "Wonder is the true mark of the philosopher." Henry read it again. He discovered that for the ancient Greeks, being confused wasn't the problem. It was the start. They had a word for it: Damascene, the philosophical wonder that initiates all genuine inquiry. As Aristotle wrote, it is wonder that leads men to philosophize. This means only when you realize that you don't know do you begin to seek true knowledge. Henry sat there for 2 hours, not studying chemistry, but having an existential crisis. He realized he wasn't studying to learn. He was studying to fake that he already knew. He took the book home. The next day, he did something completely different. He opened his chemistry book to the part he hated most, chemical equilibrium. But instead of trying to memorize the formulas, he stopped. He asked himself the most important question of his academic life. Why the hell does it work like this? Not how do I solve it, or which formula do I use, but why? Why do chemical reactions reach a point of equilibrium? What is really happening at the molecular level? He just stayed there, in his confusion, for 10 minutes, while his brain craved a simple solution. Then, an image began to form in his mind, molecules colliding, joining, and separating in a kind of molecular tug-of-war. He took a piece of paper and started to draw what he imagined was happening. He transformed his confusion from "I don't know" and "I never will" to "I don't know." And that's fascinating. When Henry finally looked up the explanation, it wasn't filling a void. It was confirming an understanding he was already building himself. The difference in retention was absurd. A week later, he could still explain chemical equilibrium in his own words. A Stanford cognitive neuroscientist who has studied learning for 18 years discovered that when you allow your brain to inhabit that space of confusion before receiving the answer, you activate the hippocampus much more intensely. You create neural structures that simple memorization can never create. Henry began applying this to everything. In history, instead of memorizing dates, he asked why wars happened. In math, instead of just applying formulas, he drew the concepts. It slowed him down a lot. It even frustrated his teachers who just wanted to move on. His friends would finish their exercises in an hour while Henry was stuck on the second problem for 40 minutes. But he realized that making sense later was just code for memorize and pretend. Tests were temporary, but the ability to think was permanent. Two things started to happen. First, Henry began to actually enjoy studying. He transformed it from an obligation into an investigation. He realized that focus is a natural side effect of real curiosity. Second, his grades eventually started to skyrocket because he had real understanding, not just pattern recognition. When the entrance exam arrived, Henry smiled at the chemistry questions. He wasn't trying to remember formulas. He was visualizing molecules. He left the room with genuine conviction. He ended up scoring in the 94th percentile and getting into a university he once thought was impossible. When Henry got to college, he saw that most freshmen were still memorizing and surviving. They were pulling all-nighters to cram information. But he studied calmly, because he had learned that you don't learn by going straight to the answer. You learn by dwelling on the question until the answer reveals itself. The Greeks called this moment of clarity anagnoresis, or recognition. It's when confusion transforms into clarity because you built it yourself. Research from Cambridge confirms that students who tolerate confusion develop a transferable understanding that allows them to solve entire categories of problems. The lesson is this: you don't have a focus problem, you have a curiosity problem. Focus isn't something you force. It is something that happens when you allow yourself to be confused enough for your brain to need to understand. Dhalmasine isn't a fancy technique. It's simply stopping the urge to run away from the feeling of not knowing, and instead asking, why does it work like this? The problem was never your brain. It was the way you were taught to use it. So ask yourself, are you ready to stop running away from the mess? It will slow you down at first, but 6 months from now, you'll be building on solid foundations while others are still restarting from scratch. The only difference between you and someone who is naturally good at studying is that they never lost their childlike curiosity. The next time you open a book, don't ask how to solve it quickly. Ask why it works that way, and let your brain dwell on the question. Focus isn't brute effort. It's fascination. Thanks for watching.